I watched a man get shot up the arse, die and meet God, and it made me realise I might have been chasing the wrong life. Hello there, welcome to the Bhagavad podcast. My name's Mark Salmon. I'm a comedian and I'm a practicing Buddhist who needs a lot more practice. Also spent much of my working life in adult social care. And this is a podcast about comedy, philosophy, spirituality, and how confused human beings try to live well when none of us really know what the F is going on. Recently I watched this experimental Japanese animated film by Masaaki Yuasa called Mind Game, partly because I'm £30,000 in debt with a film degree, so I can't get a job, but I can give you a psychoanalytic reading of Paul Blart Mall Cop. It's a really good film though, Mind Game. It's not pretentious. It's not arty. It's not arty nonsense like Paul Blart Mall Cop. It's a genuinely good film. It's also an insane, brilliant sensory overload. One of the best films I think I've ever seen. Every single frame of the film feels like a completely different film. And the main character is kind of a coward, so maybe I related to that because I've got a friend who's a coward. The main coward character is called Nishi, and he's had a crush on this girl since he was a kid. He hasn't really fully lived his whole life. He hasn't really gone for anything. And then a member of the Yakuza shoots him up the bum and he dies. He then encounters this strange cosmic trickster figure, which you could interpret as God. He's a trickster. He's mocking him. He's replaying his death over and over and over again to him from every single angle in different dimensions, right? And Nishi realizes all the times that he didn't go for it. And then somehow, although it seems completely impossible, he decides to live. And it actually doesn't just decide to live, he runs towards living. And at first, right, I thought the film was saying you've got to go for it, you've got to take more risks, stop wasting your life. But the longer I sat with it, the less sure I became, because I don't actually think it's a film about becoming more ambitious. Because recently, what I can't stop sort of turning over and over in my head at the moment is when exactly am I planning to let myself be happy? And I know I'm not the only one who had a strong reaction to this film, because the comments are full of people saying it changed their life. And although I don't know how seriously you take comments anymore, I advertised my comedy show recently on Insta, and someone responded, "I'd rather have never been born than come to this leftist comedy night." So I don't think we can take them as professional advice. I think I've spent a lot of my time, as an adult, postponing happiness. I think it's just assumed that it will arrive after the next thing, after you do more gigs, after the podcast grows, then you can make more money creatively, and then finally it's you can become this version of you who is free somehow. And there's a quote I've been thinking about that's attributed to Confucius. He says, "We have two lives, and the second begins when we realise we only have one." Increasingly, it's not just an abstract thing. My girlfriend and I are having increasingly serious conversations about having a baby, and then getting very serious, which is nice because I like to have sex. But I've had to increase my hours at work in my day job, and I'm worried that that there won't be enough time anymore left for creative work and stuff like that, because that's one of the things that makes me want to live, to be honest. And we didn't have much money when I was growing up, and I think I learned a lot of my anxiety about money from my mum, and I understand why she had it. We grew up eating bread with spread. If you're wondering what spread is, right? You're like, oh, is that like a pate? Is that like a cream cheese? No. There's absolutely nothing natural in spread. It's like this margarine. It literally was a big plastic tub and it was called spread. It's an inorganic substance that contains nuclear waste. The only thing natural in spread is despair. If I'm going to have a child, I'd like to pass down some way of surviving in the world that maybe doesn't make them want to blow their fucking brains out. Or worse, eat spread, right? And that's, I think, the contradiction, because in trying to create that life, I've started to destroy my enjoyment of life, the life that I'm actually have now, because, I started chasing creative money. I need to make more money doing that. And then I'm trying to force the podcast to grow. And, you know, before long, it's like you're trying to optimize your whole life. You know, you're not enjoying gigs anymore. Or I'm not enjoying them. I'm not enjoying the process around the podcast. You know, I love talking to people. But suddenly, it's like everything around that becomes like, how do I clip this? You know, how do I monetize this? I'm grinding my teeth, right, so hard that I have to wear a night guard to meditate. I'm going to be like a Buddhist with nubs for teeth. And when I first started doing stand-up, I remember watching this, there's a famous clip of Ralphie May, an American comedian, giving advice to comedians. And the message is basically, you have to gig every single day, several times a day. You have to work harder than anybody else. If you don't do that, you're not going to make it. Well, that guy did die, so I don't know how good his advice was. But I think I internalized that as like a permanent law. And it's that productivism, you know. If I don't get a gig constantly, I'll get rusty, you know, I'll lose it if I rest. Basically, if I stop swimming like a shark, everyone else will get ahead. And I don't think that's the only trap I fell into, right? Because all my peers and colleagues, they started getting booked at different clubs to me, and then I'm thinking, why am I not playing exactly all those exact same clubs? You know, I'm not focusing on any good gigs I have. And the embarrassing thing is, I didn't want to be a club comic. Half the time I didn't even know those places existed. You know, I went immediately from like, I have no idea what this is, to why am I not the boss of this? It's an extremely like masculine approach, to be honest. It's like the first day, like walking into your job and just being like, I'd like a raise, please. You know, I did a clown workshop with Phil Burgers, Dr. Brown. I like Dr. Burgers. He should have called himself Dr. Burgers. Dr. Phil. Anyway, Dr. Brown, Phil Burgers, he won the Edinburgh Comedy Awards. He's an amazing clown teacher. And one of the things I took from him was that sometimes you can do too much. You have to let things move through you, through your body, and let the work digest, the creative work digest. And to be honest, I was starting to resent gigging, I was resenting doing comedy. Because I was panicking about money, and I started thinking, I need to increase my output. So I downloaded TikTok in my late 30s, and suddenly I'm watching like a 22-year-old telling me growth hacks and audience retention. I saw a video, right, that said if you want people to trust you, you have to tilt your head to the left. That's so creepy. There's microchips in the vaccines. For those not watching the video version on YouTube, by the way, watching only audio, I just creaked my neck. I spoke recently on the podcast to the Buddhist teacher, Tsering Paldron, and she said something that stayed with me, right? She said that everything is already changing, everything is already slipping away. We don't control things nearly as much as we think we do. And creatively, I think this matters, right? When John Higgs came on, we talked about David Lynch and this idea of shallow ideas and deep ideas. And the shallow ideas are available, right, to everyone. Lots of people can access them. But the stranger ideas, like he said, the bigger ideas, the things that nobody else has found, he said that they're like those weird fish right at the bottom of the ocean. The weird little creepy things with like lights on their head. And he says you have to go deep enough to find them. Around the same time, I was watching this film called Good Fortune with Keanu Reeves, Aziz Ansari and Seth Rogen, which, to be honest, I know I've got a film degree, but that's the kind of film I normally watch. I'm not watching Fellini on the reg. And it left me with a question that I couldn't really shake off, right? Which wasn't like, can I get ahead? It was, do I even want the thing I'm chasing, right? And Good Fortune, if you haven't seen it, it's actually quite good. It's basically another sort of version of Freaky Friday. There's a gig economy worker played by Aziz Ansari, and he gets access to like the life of a wealthy tech bro. And it slowly becomes obvious that this person's sort of luxurious, comfortable life depends on a lot of other people creating the conditions for it. And it made me wonder, like, whether success inside a system, this system, often depends on things that I don't actually believe in. And I remember Krishnamurti's got this line that I think about too much, which says, it's no measure of good health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. I actually did this at work. I went for a promotion to become a middle manager, and I never wanted to be a middle manager. I'd be screwed. You can't deliver like an appraisal with a night guard in. You know, I got anxious about money and about a baby and about the future. So I thought, I need a promotion now. You know, and did I want a promotion or did I want security? It's not the same thing. There's this idea by Jacques Lacan, and he says that man's desire is the desire of the other. How much of this life I'm exhausting myself trying to get, did I actually choose? And it's not just career, you know, I've done this in relationships. I've been in relationships where I thought the grass was greener somewhere else and caused a lot of destruction through that and let people down I cared about. I don't really trust like simple stories about myself anymore, you know, but it matters because it's that same mechanism of somewhere else and someone else. And this is where Buddhism starts making a lot of sense to me. The idea of samsara in Buddhism, we're in the realm of samsara, which doesn't just mean life is bad, it's a state of mind. It's a constant becoming that we're in. Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche has this beautiful image where he says, like, the bad news is you're falling out of a plane without a parachute, but the good news is there's no ground. And man, I've spent years like trying to find ground. And this last year, I don't want to admit it, but it starts becoming numbers and followers and stuff like that. Basically like a version of me, something I can finally stand on and go, look, there we go, that's who I am, now I'm safe. And before I went on this clown course with Dr. Brown Burgers, I'd been reading a comic book, Promethea, by Alan Moore, and he tells the story of Inanna, a Mesopotamian goddess, who like descends into the underworld. And like at each stage of the journey, she goes, something's taken away, until she's stripped of everything she thought she was. Then a few weeks later, I'm on the course, you know, I've paid a large amount of money to stand basically in a room full of adults and be told that I was doing psychic diarrhea. That's true. If you've never been on a clown course, it's basically a room full of mostly middle-class adults voluntarily paying to have their identities dismantled until they're slightly less boring. Maybe the thing that has to be stripped away isn't our possessions. Maybe it's the endless project of becoming somebody. I spoke to Lama Owens the other day. We did a recording, and he has like this way of talking about karma in his book, The New Saints. It's so lucid, right? He speaks about karma not as cosmic punishment. You know, you did something bad and now the universe punches you. But karma is rehearsal. It's psychic patterns that we repeat and repeat and repeat until they solidify into narratives. And then those narratives become realities. You know, what we rehearse, we become. So if you rehearse like moaning, you get really good at moaning. And if you rehearse, you know, spending years, you rehearsing saying my life hasn't started yet, then happiness stays always over the horizon. Yeah, I'm good at this, rehearsing this stuff. I've got a PhD in the science and art of opening the fridge and staring into it. You look at someone else and you're like, oh, look at them, they're on Taskmaster. Taskmaster, by the way, is the symbolic certificate for life has begun to comedians. Before that, your life is worthless. Anyway, then something happened that caught me a little off guard. It was during the heat wave recently. It was a Sunday afternoon, and it's too hot basically to do anything whatsoever. It's too hot to live. So I was just lying on the grass and my girlfriend was like lying on my stomach, and I was looking up at the sky, and I had this sort of thought that I never have. It's like, I'm on holiday. But I hadn't flown anywhere, you know what I mean? I hadn't paid for anything. Nothing had been completed. I hadn't earned it. I was just lying there. But I suddenly thought, like, I'm 38 years old You know what? Maybe I've actually been me for long enough now, because being someone is exhausting. Like, I recorded a podcast recently with Marty Gleason, a comedian, and I was speaking about UFOs, and I thought it was pretty funny actually, but I nearly cut the whole section out because I imagined some rationalist listener hearing it and thinking, this guy's an idiot. I'm not listening to him anymore. And I was trying to manage an imaginary person's imaginary opinion of me. They're just like, I'm going to cancel my Patreon subscription right now. I mean, I don't actually have a subscription, but I'm going to sign up and then I'm going to cancel it. Man, trying to be like the correct version of yourself for every possible audience. I have to be a Buddhist, because I've said it publicly now, and I have to represent it properly from now. Even being a man, like, the amount of things I apparently can't actually do, like, I can't be too sensitive. A very close male friend of mine has cancer, and I sent him a text saying, like, oh, I hope you're okay, mate, when I found out, like, sending love with an X. And then, I looked at the message and I was like, oh no, I put a kiss. So my friend has got cancer and I'm having like a full-on gender emergency over the letter X. That's the kind of level of performance. That's the amount of energy that goes into being someone. So I was lying there, looking at the sky, and like a plane crossed overhead, and I had this image that plane's like a fort, just crossing the sky. And sometimes forts don't feel like little planes, sometimes they feel like bombers, massive and loud and convincing, where like everything's shaking and you can feel it in your chest, and it seems enormous, but it's still only part of the sky. And I thought, maybe I don't need another system, or like another way of being optimal, or another identity. It's more like seeing the self happen and the story happen, and seeing that it's one thing happening among many, everything else. Forts, the birds, the plane, the neighbours murdering the entire musical of Les Miserables. Now I'm miserable. Anyway, luckily, before I became too like spiritually big-headed, I remembered I still need cream for my bum. Because, I am everything, I am nothing, I'm boundless awareness, and I still need a special cream because I'm nearly 40, and this is what happens to gentlemen. And I think, maybe just for a nanosecond, just for a moment, I actually became a little bit enlightened through my bum. Now, there is a clearly obvious problem with everything I'm saying. Am I dressing exhaustion up as Buddhism? Have I failed to become successful and now conveniently discovered a philosophy where success doesn't matter? That would be pretty useful. So what I am questioning is force. And Buddhism has this lovely phrase, joyful diligence. This is the idea that like it's not forcing yourself through life. It's practicing because you've understood the value of the practice, not because you're trying to bully yourself into becoming somebody else. And maybe the opposite of force isn't laziness, I think it's participation. And that doesn't mean passivity. I think it means like showing up without making your actual right to be alive dependent on winning. A few years ago, I heard the Zen teacher, David Loy, say something really good. He said, make it your way. So if you're creative, you're doing the thing now. This is it, you're doing it now. If creativity is your way, then there isn't some future point where you'll finally become creative. If you're making things, you're making things. That's the thing. So for me, like maybe one practical shift is not necessarily getting rid of goals, but starting to ask like, what actually is underneath the thing I'm trying to get. What's underneath it? Instead of like, oh, the podcast has to succeed, it could be I want to have meaningful conversations. And I know what I'm like, so I'll do that. I'll turn these values, into KPIs, I keep sending collab requests to the Dalai Lama and he's not accepting them. He doesn't even follow me back. And there's this idea in the Bhagavad Gita that I come back to quite a lot, which is like acting without attachment to the fruits of the action. So, which doesn't mean don't act at all. It doesn't mean like lie down and hope everything's going to just sort itself out and be chill. It means do the thing, and stop making your happiness completely dependent on the outcome, which I think is different from not caring about the outcome. So I'll upload a clip. I'll put my phone down. Then 40 seconds later, I'll pick it back up. I'm like, has my life changed yet? I want to know if my life has changed. John Higgs, when he came on the podcast, said something that really stayed with me. He said that a deep connection with a handful of people is worth more than a shallow connection with millions. So I've spent years trying to arm wrestle reality into becoming the life I want it to be. And I'm not even good at arm wrestling. I once lost an arm wrestle to my mum with the arm she broke. She broke, is it the humerus? She broke her arm and later beat me at an arm wrestle. It's a true story. So maybe I'm not the person who should be trying to force reality into submission. And then last week something happened that sort of pulled all these threads together. I went to hear Mingyur Rinpoche speak. And one thing that really stuck with me was how ordinary what he was saying sounded. He was talking about awareness. Awareness not as something that we have to manufacture, because it's already happening. We're hearing, we're seeing, we're thinking, we're aware of it. But most of the time we don't notice it. Then maybe we recognize it for a second, then perhaps next time for a little longer. And that felt strangely pretty reassuring, right? Because I've spent so much of my life treating awareness, awareness in meditation as another achievement, another thing to get. And then he also spoke about something else, right? He said that underneath every movement, every little shift in the chair, every action, even every blink, is this movement towards happiness and away from suffering. That's what we're doing. When I look back at my own life, in comedy or work or relationships or whatever, even a lot of the mistakes I've made, underneath all of it is there's always someone trying to be happy. Sometimes very confused person, sometimes not very wise, but trying. And we don't want ourselves or the people we love to suffer. These aren't things that we have to manufacture, that's already there. The practice then is recognizing that. We already possess all these qualities, and I realise that maybe I've spent years trying to become somebody else. Somebody who's more successful. Somebody who didn't make all the mistakes I made. Maybe I wasn't trying to become somebody better, actually. Maybe I'm just trying to become somebody who finally deserved to be happy. And I don't think anyone earns that. Because I think believing maybe, we have to earn our right to be happy, it doesn't actually make us better people. I think it makes me more frightened. And I know that when I'm frightened, I start clinging on to stuff and I start competing with others and I start grasping. And maybe that's why it's not just personal to me, because the way I relate to myself, it doesn't stay inside my own head. It spills, doesn't it? It spills into my relationships, into work, and even in the way that I try to change the world. So that afternoon, that I was lying on the grass and clouds were passing, the birds, the planes overhead, girlfriend sleeping on my chest. I had everything. I keep promising basically that I'll allow myself to have later. I was doing the thing. I'm doing the thing now. I don't know. maybe I've thought enough stuff, maybe I thought enough. And maybe that the life that I've been trying to reach all this time, maybe it was already here. I don't know. That's where I've got to anyway, for the moment. Thanks for listening. I'm going to be taking a short break, as I said, while I'm away at Edinburgh Fringe. Probably come back, well, maybe in September or October or sometime. And if you want to support the podcast, best place to do that is at patreon.com/the Bardo podcast. Helps a lot if you can help keep this sustainable. Also, please do share, comment below, let me know what you thought and, what you're working through at the moment. It'd be quite interesting. I think that's it from me. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time on the In Between. Have a good one.